Good afternoon, everybody. We will continue on the lecture about mortality. And we saw life tables in the previous class. I just wanted to show you in our course website, here under the days 11 and 12, theories of demography, we already passed through this lecture, and I had here some videos that I had posted that kind of give an overview of theories of demography, the demographic transition model. I mean, but this case here is kind of a funny, silly song. And just, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, Professor Matt Hauer, he is a professor in the Sociology department at Florida State University. He tweeted this video that he made, it's kind of like a cartoon that he made, and kind of it's a debate between demographers about the issues of population growth and how that can take increase poverty. So it's a debate with Malthus, Karl Marx, and other demographers. So I just thought it was fun. And he sent me the file, and I just uploaded to my YouTube channel, and I also embedded it here. And I mean, it's just, I just thought it was interesting the way that he is pretty much teaching theories of demography, in this case, in 3 minutes. It's really loud here. Sorry about that. I'm not going to show the whole thing. I just want to show you the style of the thing. This guy is that guy that's interviewing the New York Times video, and he wrote that population bomb book, and I mentioned to you in class. Oops, sorry. I like her hairstyle. Wake up. Yeah, so I just thought it was a fun video. I ended up playing everything. And yeah, so it's available. I mean, I had to kind of pause sometimes because it's really fast.
Oh yeah.
So you can go to the course website or go to the YouTube channel and it's gonna be there. The yeah, he tweeted like either yesterday or 2 days ago, and then he sent it to me. I just think that this debate is exactly related to the first assignment that I gave to you guys about critical thinking. You see how the debate keeps going on over the years into more contemporary demographers, and it's not a solved debate, but it kind of shows that we have to have some background, some reading about these demographers to kind of understand that population growth per se is not negative. And I mean, that's a topic that we talked since the beginning of this course. And it was good that he made the video before the semester was over, so I could show it to you here. Cool. I will also today, I can see the chat here. So if you have any questions, just unmute yourself. My video is not working. That's why you cannot see me there. I will continue on the lecture here about mortality. And here now I'm going to talk about, give a little bit of a history of mortality in the world, and then afterwards focus on the US. And I did already add some slides or updated some slides about the coronavirus pandemic using data from today, from April 1st. And I already uploaded it to the course website. So you can download the new version of this lecture has, I think, 160 slides. But of course, I did not cover a lot of the ones related to live tables, that they were extra. But here in this portion of the lecture, I'm going to define what is exactly health and mortality transition, and understand changes in health and mortality over time. Discuss, I mean, I already mentioned the concepts of lifespan and longevity. So talk about them a little bit again. Disease and death over the life cycle, kind of emphasizing that the causes of death, they vary by age throughout our lives, right? And just give you some data about that in the world. What are the major causes of poor health and death? And also discuss about health and mortality inequalities. So whenever we are talking about mortality, we have to remember that we also have to understand the trends in terms of morbidity. Morbidity, it's related to health, is related to causes of diseases that people have. So health and death are two sides of morbidity and mortality. Morbidity is related to the prevalence of diseases in a population. So it's more related to the overall health pattern of a population. And mortality is related to the pattern of death. And overall, whenever we talked about the demographic transition theory, when mortality starts to decline and after a while fertility declines, if we look specifically at the decline in mortality, Omran proposed this theoretical framework that explains how we change from a society that has really high morbidity, or in other words, really poor health, and really high mortality, in other words, high death rates. And most of the death in these previous societies, before we reach good levels of health, most of the mortality is due to communicable diseases occurring especially among the young. So infant mortality rate is really high in those societies that have still high levels of mortality and poor levels of health. And then we move into a society with better levels of better health conditions and lower death rates, and lower death rates related to infectious diseases and communicable diseases. And most people in these more contemporary societies, they die at older ages from degenerative diseases, right? Some heart conditions, cancer, and so on. And this process of shifting from these societies with high levels of mortality and poor health due to infectious and communicable diseases into good health and low mortality with low levels of infectious diseases and high levels of degenerative diseases, it's what Omran called the epidemiological transition. And the epidemiological transition then, it's not only related to declines in mortality, to declines in the mortality rates. It also is related to changes in which are the primary causes of death, right? So whenever we saw before that graph that summarizes the demographic transition theory, that graph, it's pretty much showing the decline in mortality from high to low death rates, but it's not talking about the causes of death. And this chapter here, we focus, we look at that as well, okay? So death at older ages, for virtually all of human history, early death was a commonplace. Beginning about 200 years ago, we have been seeing improvements in life expectancy, lower death rates, and people start dying at older ages. The survival of more people to ever older ages is a key contribution to demographic transition. So exactly these changes in health and mortality patterns contribute to the demographic transition, because after mortality declines, fertility also tends to decline. Most people now survive to advanced ages and die pretty quickly. The idea that people reach 80, 90 years of age, and most of the people now die around similar ages. The variability by age in mortality is compressed, leading to an increased rectangularization of mortality. So what is rectangularization of mortality? We can show this in a graph, in this next slide here. So this is the percentage of people alive in the US for all these age groups here. And we have data for 1901 to 1910, 1951 to 1960, 2011. So this is real data. This is data pretty much recalculating. We have the percentage of people alive in each one of these age groups. So at the beginning, we have everybody alive, and then we apply the mortality rates by age group. Then you start to see people dying. And because mortality was higher in previous decades, more people die here, so the percentage of people still alive drops faster in previous years, in previous decades, than in more recent years. And in this last exercise here, this is a theoretical curve. It's pretty much making this theoretical exercise. So let's say that nobody dies in the US or anywhere else, would be done for anywhere else here, up to age 100. And then at age 100, everybody dies. So that's how it would look like the percentage of people still alive by age group. So what the previous slide is saying is that since now people live into ever older ages, we start to see this rectangularization of mortality in the sense that this curve here start to more and more get into this rectangular shape that technically could reach this theoretical example here of people reaching 100 years of age and then everybody dying, right? So just to show how this process of improving mortality actually makes people live longer, and the percentage of people still alive by age group, the curve tends to have a more rectangular shape over time. For most of history, life expectancy fluctuated between 20 and 30 years of age. So throughout the history, centuries ago, the average number of years that people would expect to live was between only 20 and 30 years of age. About only 2/3 of babies survive to their first birthday. So really, really high infant mortality. 1 out of 3 babies dying before reaching 1 year of age. And only about half were still alive at age 5. So 50% would die before reaching age 5. And now we have 99% overall in the world reaching, passing through their first birthday and reaching age 5. Around 10% of the people made it to the 65, to age 65 in pre-modern society. And now the overall average for the world is around 90% of people reach at least 65 years of age. Okay? And there is still variation in terms of mortality around the world. The countries here, like in red and dark orange, are the ones with higher levels of life expectancy. And this specific data here is for women. So that's female life expectancy at birth in 2005. That's data from, 2015. But just to show that you still see variation, African countries, sub-Saharan Africa countries with still low levels of life expectancy, which means higher mortality. But even if you look at specific countries, you also see variations within countries. This map here doesn't show it, but for example, in Brazil, we have worse health and higher mortality in the north and northeastern regions comparing to the south of Brazil, for example. But in this case here, compare across countries, you also see this variation around the world. Here is to show how the mortality changed over time across societies. So in pre-modern eras, we had around life expectancies of around 20, 30 years of age expected among women. And this is the percentage of people surviving to age 1, only 63. So pretty much 1 out of 3 babies did not reach age 1, and only 8% reached age 65. But of course, there were variations in the world at that time as well. So some countries reach on average 30 years of age for women, but still 1 out of 4 children did not reach age 1. So 74% only reach age 1, but 17% only reach 65 years of age. Because of this high mortality and low life expectancy, this is really related, the last column is really related to the notion of the demographic transition theory. Because mortality is so high, the percentage of people reaching 65 years of age is really low, and of course, life expectancy is low, you would need a high fertility in order to have zero population growth. So what are these numbers here saying? This is the number of children on average that women should have at that time in order for the population of those countries don't decrease over time, and in this case, not even increase. They would just stay stable over time. And this last comment kind of shows us, because of the really high levels of mortality in pre-modern societies, we would need 6.1 children per woman on average in order to have zero population growth, exactly because we need a lot of people being born, because a lot of them would not survive to younger ages, and in order to replace previous generations. But as we go through time, we start to see improvements in mortality. So the US and Europe in the late 18th and early 19th century decreased life expectancy to 40. And this data here this is data for now 2015. The lowest sub-Saharan Africans still have really high levels of mortality, low life expectancy, 46. The world average is around 73. Mexico 78, United States 81, Canada 84, and Japan has the highest in the world, 86. So in these countries, and actually even with the world average, now if women have around 2.1 children on average, that new generation will provide enough people to replace the previous generations and have zero population growth. And why not exactly only 2? Because we still have some people dying in younger ages, right? We still have up to 25 years of age, you still have people dying. So a lot of women will not reach 49 years of age when they finish their reproductive cycle or reproductive ages. And so we still require a total fertility rate above 2. Okay, so the 2.1 here is what I have talked to you in the fertility chapter related to the level of fertility replacement. The sense that what's the number of children that women would need to have for the children to replace themselves and their partners. The average overall number is 2.1 children per woman. So we see this variation over time really clear here, and also variations between countries. And just going back, and this is data from, some of these slides here are from the John Weeks book that I cite sometimes in the references of the lecture. So these specific slides are not in the textbook, but they just complement it. But that's the book by John Weeks. Life expectancy in the Roman era is estimated to have been 22 years. People who reach adulthood were not too likely to reach a very advanced age, although of course some people did reach advanced age. So whenever we see these movies or these TV series about the Roman era with a lot of old people, that's not exactly how it was, that society, right? Because life expectancy was really low at that time. Maybe people were young but looked older, but that's not what the movies or the series are implying. In the Middle Ages, the plague hit Europe in the 14th century, having spread west from Asia. An estimated 1/3 of the population of Europe may have perished, so these are all estimates, from this disease between 1346 and 1350. It appears to be the same disease that we have today. It's not really known why it's so fatal in the past and not so much anymore, probably due to general poor health at that time. That people didn't have treated water, sewer system, and basic health habits. And they also had few resources to battle the disease in terms of medications. And with Europeans going into the American continent, they pretty much took diseases to the American continent. So, I mean, we all know the story. They took diseases, horses, and guns to to the American continent and brought back new foods and few new diseases. And one explanation, actually, so these are all a hypothesis, one explanation for the relative ease in which Spain dominated Latin America after they arrived in the 1500s is that the explorer had immunity to the diseases that they brought compared to the devastation that the diseases affected the native population, the indigenous population, right? So exactly some of these viruses, diseases that they brought into the American continent might have affected the native population in much larger degree than the Europeans. And in the Industrial Revolution, we have been talking about the Industrial Revolution a lot here. And it's actually related to that video that we just played, in the sense that we, like, based on the Malthus theory, we would have a much faster population growth relative to our capacity of produce food and produce basic resources for our survival. But then the Industrial Revolution included a lot of technological advances and a much more efficient way of producing food and resources to the population. And throughout that period as well, plague and the Little Ice Age had reduced, and more efficient technology, better ways of life, better places of living, it's all a result of better economic conditions of this population. So income, improved nutrition, housing, and sanitation. And at that time, life expectancy in Europe and in the US reached around 40 years of age on average. So was population growth a cause or an effect of rising living standards? If I have better income, we already talked about this. Better income, I will tend to actually have higher chances of getting married and then having children because I have a better, more stable life. And that by having more children, that might generate a higher population growth, right? So, but also a higher population growth, if everybody's working in all this more efficient way of producing resources, that will improve life of everybody. So they're like, it's the chicken and the egg here, which one came first? There is a reverse causality in this question. That's the main point of the question. And but it's related actually to the debate that we saw in the theories of demography. Sorry, I had to mute myself to coffee. There were as many deaths to children under age 5 as there were at 65 and over, kind of meaning that mortality of children was still really high during the Industrial Revolution. Infectious diseases were still the dominant reasons for death, but the ability to kill was diminishing. So the change in the epidemiological transition that Omeran discusses, it did not change all of the sudden from high levels of infectious diseases among children into degenerative diseases among older people. There is a transition process there in which the rates of communicable and infectious diseases decline and the rates of degenerative diseases among older people increase. Okay? And so in the 19th century, there are some key elements that help postponing death: the belief in the power of human intervention, the Western science. Pretty much people start to believe on medication, on going to the doctor and being treated for diseases. Improved nutrition. So now people have more money or better food available to them. And it happened first in Western Europe, and then it started to spread throughout the world. Clean water, toilets, bathing facilities, a lot of things that we take for granted nowadays, they were not available before the 19th century. Sewage systems being implemented in cities, and sanitation studies in Liverpool really show that after the implementation of this basic infrastructure, it increased the improved health of people and then decreased mortality. And then vaccinations, right? Vaccinations also had a huge beneficial impact on the reduction of mortality. And basic things like the validation of the germ theory, it was something that in the past it was not well understood, but Samuel Weiss, for example, was the pioneer of antiseptic procedures. Lister kind of just introducing basic cleaning procedures before surgical procedures. And Louis Pasteur, all his experiments about germs and diseases. And then we have there the development of vaccinations. And this is a really important thing, like in the current pandemic that we are living. Before the pandemic, here in the US, we already had a movement anti-vaccines. And a lot of them were linking vaccinations into the chances of children having autism. I mean, the problem about the lies is that lies, they don't come with any proof. But in order to refute a lie, you have to create all these really high standard studies to refute the lies. And there is one article here, a recent article, that it's in the website. So if you just go into the website on the lecture about mortality, extra readings, if you just unzip this file here, you're going to see this study about the association between autism and vaccination. And what's the association? There is no association. Why is it hard to refute these lies about the effects of vaccination? Is that it's difficult to collect appropriate data to measure that. In this case, the best way to do it is to have the same people while they are children, have some of them vaccinated and some of them not vaccinated, and follow those people over time and see which kind of diseases they had. And so in this paper here, it's a paper from Denmark, and then more than 600,000 children were followed in Denmark, and these are children that were born between 1999 and 2010, and they received follow-up visits, and then the incidence of diseases from 1 year of age and through 2013. So you have to pretty much do what? You have to do a longitudinal study in which you follow the same people over time. You interview, you get information for those people, for those children. You get information for those children, the same children over time. Of course, you get this information from their parents. And they were trying to see if the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine had an association with autism. The study strongly supports that MMR vaccination does not increase the risk of autism, does not trigger autism in susceptible children, and is not associated with clustering of autism cases after vaccination. So you need to have this really, that's the difficult thing about the truth. The truth is more difficult to spread because you usually need these really high standard studies. But lies, the bad thing about lies is that they spread even without any scientific study or facts behind them, because lies are usually easy or to accept. So that's why we have to be concerned about the studies that we are, or the discussions that we are hearing right now about vaccines and the pandemic, because there is a lot of still skepticism about people not wanting to take vaccines, because the methodology that was implemented, for example, in the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, it's different than it was in previous vaccines. In previous vaccines, you would get weaker forms of the virus, and then you would introduce in the human bodies, and then the human body would be able to create antibodies against that weaker version of the virus. Now, with these new vaccines, you are pretty much you are using the DNA information from the virus and then putting inside the woman's body, and the woman's body recognize that and produce antibodies against it. And then some people say, oh, that's has never been tested before. You are just creating so many proteins against a possible virus, and we don't know the long-lasting effect out of it. And why was that not done before? Basically, the reason that was not done before is because of money, right? The technology, this technology of at least thinking theoretically that we could include the DNA of the virus or different ways that you do it. Of course, that's not my area of study. So you would include the DNA of the virus using different techniques in the human's body. It was already developed by previous scientists, but in order to have it developed, they would need a lot of money to actually get it done. And what happened just now, with a lot of money from the American government, even from the previous administration, and also from European governments, is to give billions of dollars to all these private companies, so they would have money to develop the technology with these new vaccines. Vaccines would take years to be developed, and then they receive so much money with the goal to develop a vaccine in a short period of time. And after they reached that goal, the government came and gave more billions of dollars to buy the vaccine. So they paid the private companies to develop the vaccine, and they paid them afterwards to buy. And of course, they test the vaccines, like they did some clinical trials to see if people that did not receive the vaccine were more likely to get the virus or not. But all these things were done really fast, but people are always kind of skeptical about these advances. But this kind of skepticism we also saw in previous centuries. But now we have a better understanding of science. All these studies, all these clinical trials, a bunch of different articles are available to us. We can read those articles and we can see that all this really rapid development on vaccination techniques that we experienced this last year is because there was a need of the pandemic that we had to deal with, killing millions and millions of people. And we had to invest money from the government in order for private companies to develop those vaccines, right? So that's why when we read these books and talking about the 19th century, how there were skepticism about science and people didn't realize that with like really small changes, not even vaccination, just clean water would change the chances of getting some diseases and dying, right? So that's just important for us to understand this. So although vaccination, all these different areas are not my specific area of interest, but exactly of being a demographer that tries to understand these technological advancements over time and how that affects mortality and morbidity, it's good to read, but it's also good to read sources that base their analysis in scientific data. So that's why that extra readings about the autism vaccine is posted on the website. So in the 20th century, kind of like health is taken as a social movement, leading to government-organized universal healthcare systems in pretty much all rich countries besides the US. So health is seen as a necessity. And one interesting thing that we see during the pandemic now is that actually the US is among the developed countries, the one that doesn't have free public health system, and several European countries have. But the approach that the American government took now for the vaccines is being much more efficient than European countries. So the rate of vaccination in the US is higher than in European countries, Western European countries. So it's just interesting to see that the role of the government during the pandemic now in the US has been efficient. And actually in the UK as well has been really efficient compared to other Western European countries. Antibiotics emerged around World War II. World War II was a really defining moment when you have a war between countries, two major groups trying to win, and then you have a lot of investment from the government also in development of technology, in this case, guns, arms, everything. So you have a huge technological advance that it's not only related to war, but it also provided some advances in the medical area, which improved health and mortality decline. Also, in the 20th century, we see more development of vaccinations. And I just said now, the current pandemic is making even more advances in that area. Oral rehydration, therapy for infants and adults. Basic therapy was important to keep children and also adults healthier. Advanced diagnosis, drugs, and other treatments for degenerative diseases to keep older people alive longer were developed throughout the 20th century as well. And here is just a graph to show improvements in life expectancy and focus only North America, only Mexico, US, and Canada. And data before 1900 in this graph we have only for the United States. But you see overall for the three countries, the levels of life expectancy increasing, which means that mortality is declining, age-specific mortality rates, as we saw in the life tables, declining, and then it makes the life expectancy at birth to increase. And this is data for women, but you also see variation across these three countries. Lower levels of life expectancy in Mexico compared to the US, compared to Canada. But as we start to see improvements in health, improvements in or declines in mortality across the three countries, the differentials become a little smaller in more recent years. So here by 2010, we have the differentials are much smaller than we had in previous decades. And talking about World War II was a turning point. Here's data from major continents, Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the American continent divided between Latin America, North America, and also Europe. And life expectancy at birth improving from the 1950s to 2010 in all these different continents. And of course, those continents that had really low levels of life expectancy, their jump is much steeper than countries that already had high levels of life expectancy at birth. And the differentials now, we still see them, but they are less pronounced than what we had in the past, comparing Africa, for example, here to North America, and Africa to North America and Europe. So basically, we have two ways to postpone death to the oldest possible ages. It's pretty much prevention or curing people. Prevent diseases from occurring or spreading when they do happen. It's prevention, so vaccinations, clean water, sanitation, good nutrition. And in this case here, you don't have to have a direct contact with a physician in order to have prevention. In curing people of diseases when they are sick, we need more advanced diagnostic technology, drugs, and skilled physicians. So even now, we see debates because of the pandemic. Some governments, for example, the Brazilian president, who is a new fascist president, he pretty much doesn't believe in the seriousness of the pandemic, and he's pretty much against vaccines. He says that he didn't say that, but if you just look some interviews from some weeks or some months ago, you see that he is against vaccine, didn't do any policy. So that's why Brazil now is getting worse and worse about the pandemic. And his only approach is trying to say, oh, we should actually try to cure people after they get the pandemic, after they get the virus. We should not focus on vaccinations. We should not focus on social distancing or lockdowns or anything. So again, this discussion about prevention or about medication and everything is something that we have going on in the world right now. And these really more new fascist presidents that we see, for example, in Brazil, they do not take science into account. And they are the reason that so many people are dying in those countries. Nutrition transition and obesity. The poor people were skinny because only the rich people could afford to access enough quantities of food, but not anymore. Nowadays, even poor people have access to food. But the problem is that usually cheap food, it's not really healthy food. So the world has been experiencing nutrition transition toward diet high in fat and processed food. So those are like fast food, which is really popular in the US. It's cheaper than healthy food, but it's not good for us in the long term. We are moving towards a diet with low levels of fiber, and we also tend to exercise less. And related to all these points, we have an increase in degenerative diseases as well. Okay? So you see a transition in terms of mortality, in terms of morbidity, and related to that, you also see nutrition transition. I mean, even poor people start to have access to food, but not to good food or not to high quality of food for them in the long term. Another point that I highlighted at the beginning of this section is the difference between lifespan and longevity. So this is the lifespan, is the oldest age in which we measured someone, a human being, achieving the maximum age in which a real person achieved throughout the human society. And the oldest age to which beings were measured to reach was 122 years and 164 days. It's a French woman that died in 2016. But there are some articles kind of debating about whether that she really reached that age, but it gives us an idea of the maximum age that you would reach if we have good health habits, if we don't have major genetic issues or susceptibility to chronic diseases and so on. And lifespan, in this case, is almost entirely a biological phenomenon, in the sense that it's more related to your genetics, it's more related to your predisposition of having diseases that could kill you in the short term. Demographers are more, or social scientists as a whole, are more concerned with life expectancy, longevity, the age at which we actually die as a group, as a population, on average. That's what we usually study. We study life expectancy, which is the expected number of years to be lived on average by a particular population at a particular time, based on data from a specific place at a specific time point. Granted, in the world, the life expectancy at birth is around 71 years for all humans. And in this case, it does have biological and social components, reasons. So lifespan is more related to biological reasons, and life expectancy, the population as a whole, the levels in which we are living, is related to both biological and social effects. Populations with high mortality tend to have high morbidity as well, higher levels of prevalence of diseases. Of course, this is not a one-on-one relationship, so it's not so straightforward. And we may live longer even though we might not be very healthy. I think, and related to what I showed in the previous slide here about less exercise, I saw a video a while ago. I don't remember. I think it was on Twitter or some other social media. It was a video made by the Canadian government, kind of showing, based on scientific studies and everything, showing that overall Canadians are living a long time. But those that have better habits throughout their lives, in the sense of like eating better food and actually exercising more, they will be healthier than people that don't eat well and don't exercise. So kind of showing that all people on average are living longer, but the way that you live your life in earlier years, you dictate how you live in the last 10, 15 years of your life. The last 10, 15 years of your life, you might be really susceptible to get chronic diseases because of not exercising throughout your life, not eating healthy throughout your life. And that's also related to drug use, is also related to alcoholic abuse. So all these things, like the way that we live earlier on, will dictate not necessarily if I will live longer or not, but if I will live healthier at older ages or not. Some people that I like to run. And some people say, I don't think it's worth running because there are some studies showing that people who run don't live longer than people who don't run, or people who don't exercise. But it's not just about mortality. It's also about morbidity. Morbidity is important. Which shape we will be towards the 10 last years of our life. Mortality varies by age, as we have been seeing since clearly in the life table exercise. And when I talk about the life table, humans are like most other animals with respect to the general pattern of death by age. The very young and the very old are more vulnerable to die. Young adults are the least likely to die. The risk of death are relatively low after the initial year of life, lasting at least until middle age. And it actually corresponds to reproductive ages. So when we are around our reproductive ages, women between 15 and 49, that's when we experience the lower chances of dying. So that's how nature developed. And also we saw from the graphs of life expectancy at birth by age, we see that below 1 year of age, the life expectancy actually might be even lower than when a child reaches 1 year of age, because the chances of dying before reach 1 year of age is so high that once you pass that chance, you actually gain a bonus in terms of your life expectancy when you reach the age group of 1 to 4. And beyond middle age, mortality starts to increase, although at a decelerating rate, and that's related to the rectangularization of mortality that I mentioned before. We will die sometime, but the pattern, the shape of the curve of percentage of people alive by age starts to have a more rectangular shape, right? This is also, this is pretty much showing in a graph format. This is a graph that I already showed you before in the semester. This is just a graph format of what I just said here. In the initial years of life, the very young and the old ones are the most vulnerable. So the youngest people and the oldest people are the ones that have the highest death rates. After past the chances of dying before I reach 1 year of age, my chance of dying actually decline a lot and stays kind of in low levels until around 49 years of age, and then it starts to increase a lot. So that's what exactly we're talking about, the reproductive ages between 15 and 49 for a woman. And these high levels of mortality before I reach 1 year of age, we will reach it again only in really more advanced ages. And these are data for Nigeria, Guatemala, and Japan, right? So the levels of mortality, even in Japan, I will reach those levels only by around age 50, right? Mortality also varies by sex. That's why I mentioned before that we calculate life expectancy for women and life expectancy for men. So we estimate the life tables by sex. Women have a lower probability of death at every age from the moment of conception. And that's a biological factor that women live longer. In societies in which women don't have the same opportunities as men, so in which women don't have access to the same health services, education, food as men, then you might see women having worse or higher level of mortality than men. But that's not a biological fact, that's a more social problem. It's exactly societies that have gender inequalities. Unless society intervenes with a lower status for women, that gives them less food, less access to healthcare, less education, lower earnings. Unless that happens, women will have lower chances of dying. And this thing here might sound weird for us, a woman give less food. In developing countries, that there is a preference for sons. If a poor family don't have much food available, they will tend to give more food into their sons instead of their daughters. That affects the health of their daughters. And if that family has to choose one of them to actually get good education, they will tend to give preference for boys, right? So there is, and in the long term, women not having access to education will affect the jobs that they can do, and they will get worse paying jobs. And that will affect their overall life standards. Affecting their overall life standards, affect their health, and increases mortality. Okay? So the discussion here is not only about biological factors, but also by social factors, cultural factors. And there are other mortality differentials as well. Urban areas usually have low levels of mortality than rural areas. Slums in the periphery have really high levels of mortality for the people compared to better neighborhoods. People with higher levels of educational attainment live longer, have lower levels of mortality. Rich people overall also live longer. Race and ethnicity differentials, we see that a lot in the US, and we're going to see in the following slides, African Americans having worse mortality levels, so higher mortality than non-Hispanic white population. And married people on average also tend to have better health outcomes and lower mortality. And the thing is, like, whenever we talk about urban and rural differentials, there are sometimes people that mention, oh, in the past, there are some, we tend to have some informal conversations with people in which they remember rural areas or our grandparents and so on. Remember, oh, at that time, they exercise much more, they walk much more every day, they ate much healthier. But if you compare all indicators in terms of mortality and morbidity, people in rural areas have low health indicators and higher mortality. I mean, my grandparents died when they were in their 60s, the four of them. And my parents are now, like my father is in his 60s, my mother's in her 70s. So it's just by showing that simple indicator of average age in which people are reaching, it kind of shows us that rural areas or previous societies had worse health conditions and higher mortality levels. Okay? And here, talking a little bit about mortality trends and causes of death. The World Health Organization categorized diseases in these three major groups: communicable diseases, non-communicable diseases, and injuries. Communicable diseases include these ones here: bacterial, viral, protozoan diseases, maternal conditions including lack of prenatal care, right, may increase the chances of women dying due to issues during the pregnancy and also for losing their babies. Delivering somewhere besides a hospital, because if there is any complication, if they're outside of a hospital, it's harder to deal with the issue, so they increase their chance of dying. Seeking an unsafe abortion in countries that abortion is forbidden. Wealthy women, they can still access abortion in clinics that have all good conditions for them. So usually middle class and upper middle class women. But in those countries in which abortion is forbidden, women who are poor and want to attend it will seek it in really unsafe places. So it becomes a really public health issue, because you pretty much have a higher chance of dying of abortion if you're poor than if you are rich. Perinatal conditions surrounding birth, so there are conditions in which women are exposed surrounding birth, also affect their chances of being exposed to diseases and dying. So these are conditions just before and after birth, so it is related to prenatal care, for example, and to where you are having your baby. So all these things are related to public health, right? So in Brazil, I mean, this data, the government doesn't collect that because abortion is forbidden, but there are surveys in Brazil, and we see, or studies in Brazil that show exactly women, or in other countries in the world, whenever those countries don't have abortion allowed by the government abstains from giving any care, women will still seek abortion-specific conditions, but the poor ones won't have access to clinics, still illegal clinics, but they don't have access to clinics that have that provide safe procedures to get an abortion, right? And nutritional deficiencies, the way that we raise, what we eat, all of that is related to our chances to have communicable diseases. And here in this graph, the rows that are highlighted in gray are communicable diseases, and the non-communicable diseases are in white. And the last column here, the last row here, is a life expectancy at birth, and in this case for both sexes, men and women combined. And this is the number of deaths in the world in 2011 in millions, and I'm showing that heart disease and stroke are being the main causes of death in more recent years, comparing to communicable diseases, for example, the ones in gray. And these are the top 10 death rates per 100,000 people in the population in 2011. So we're just showing here the top 10 death rates for each one of these groups of countries, the high income countries, upper middle income, lower middle income, and low income countries. Yeah, so we have 10 here, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah. So the other cells here are empty. It's just because we are showing just the rates, the top 10 rates for each one of this group of countries. And what you see, the pattern here is that high income countries and upper middle income countries, the highest rates are the ones in the cells that are in white, which are non-communicable diseases, or in this case, even injury in upper middle income countries. But this is really clear. Only lower respiratory infection are one of the top 10, but it's still not the top 1 or the top 5. And then in lower middle income countries, low income countries, they're still delayed in the epidemiological transition. We see still among the top 10 causes of death, we see a lot of those causes being due to communicable diseases. In low-income countries, it's even more clear that this, pretty much in low-income countries, 8 out of the top 10 death rates are caused by communicable diseases. And that's related to the epidemiological transition, that's related to the demographic transition. Those countries still have higher levels of mortality, in other words, lower levels of life expectancy at birth compared to these other countries. Okay? And the 10 leading causes of death in the world. So nowadays we have more overall non-communicable diseases as the ones that are killing more people overall, and more infectious and communicable diseases having lower levels, okay? So that's just to show these different patterns, and this graph here is related to this first column. So that's the overall number of deaths by causes in the world in 2011. This data here is from 2012, but it kind of breaks down by similar categories. And here, just to show the overall number of adults and children estimated to be living with HIV in 2013, they were around 35 million. I mean, these are estimates, so it can be actually between 33 to 37 million with a 95% confidence interval. So that's how much we think that this interval contains the true number of people estimated to be living with HIV. And we see really high levels of HIV in sub-Saharan Africa, exactly the countries that have the worst socioeconomic conditions. Okay. This exercise here, this graph, it is from our textbook, it kind of makes an exercise of, let's get a population of 1,000 people. 1,000 people in the world. And let's just get information by groups of countries and also the chances of dying by all these different diseases. Out of these 1,000 people dying due to the top 10 causes of death in these three groups of countries, low income, middle income, and high income countries, how many people would be dying to each one of these top 10 causes of death in each one of these groups of countries with information from 2008? Is anyone else having issues logging into Canvas? Hades asking. I don't know. Does someone have an issue with logging to Canvas? I log in today and I posted a quiz that is going to open in 3 minutes. So out of 1,000 people, considering the size of the population in low income, middle income, and high income countries, and the chances of dying of each one of these diseases, 163 of them would die in low income countries, 677 middle income countries, and 159 in high income countries. These first numbers here are more related to the overall population size of these countries, okay? But then we see the distribution. In low-income countries, lower respiratory infections, diarrheal diseases, HIV, AIDS. So it's more infectious, communicable diseases. Middle-income countries, then you start to move into more chronic conditions. Ischemic heart disease, stroke, and other cerebral vascular diseases, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. The middle-income countries have more similar patterns as high-income countries. Also heart disease, stroke, lung cancer, and so on. Okay, so this is just to show that most of the people, when we categorize in these three groups, they are dying in middle-income countries because that's more where the population is. But the pattern of the reasons why they are dying is different in middle-income countries compared to low-income countries. Here's more related to communicable, infectious diseases, and here's more chronic conditions. Here as well, chronic conditions. And that's the life expectancy at birth. In the world, the average for the world is in blue, and more developed regions in green, less developed regions in red, and least developed countries in purple. Everybody improving. Mortality, so life expectancy at birth increases for everybody, but you still see differentials across countries, across regions. And third thing that the graph is showing, the differentials between these countries were wider in previous decades than what they are now. So whenever you look at the graph, you have to try to see what's showing. It's showing that everybody's improving life expectancy, so mortality is declining. You still have variation across the countries. So you see some having higher or lower life expectancy, but the differentials are declining. Least developed countries are passing through demographic epidemiological transition that benefits their life expectancy at birth. Okay? So right now it's 4:30. I will continue on this lecture on Tuesday. And we still have to talk about mortality and longevity in the US, infant mortality. There is a short discussion at the end of this chapter in the textbook about the future course of mortality. And then I will just give some updated numbers for the coronavirus pandemic. And then, as I said, I updated the lecture on the course website, and you can download it there. And that's the slide that I'm going to use the next week. Probably exactly because we didn't have 2 classes because of the winter storm. We won't be able to reach all the chapters that are listed in the syllabus. But my hope is at least to cover this chapter, finish this one about mortality, and then internal migration and international migration. So those are the basic chapters in demography, the three components, going more in depth in each one of them. Okay? So thank you very much. Have a great weekend, and I see you guys on Tuesday.